Winter has a way of testing people. Some hide behind locked doors, pretending not to hear the world outside. Others just hope someone will open theirs. That night, as snow buried the street in silence, a small hand knocked on Jason's door. He almost didn't answer, until he heard the faintest voice say, "Sir, may I keep this blanket?" Jason looked closer. It wasn't a blanket. It was his own doormat, the one he'd thrown away that morning. The boy's lips trembled, his breath turning to mist in the cold. He wasn't begging, just asking, as if kindness was something borrowed, not given. And in that moment, Jason realized the world hadn't gone cold, people had. What he did next would remind everyone that sometimes warmth doesn't come from fire, it comes from someone finally saying, "Come in." Before we continue, thank you for watching and for believing in stories that still carry heart, stories that remind us kindness isn't weakness, it's courage. If you're new here, we'd love to have you join this family. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay till the end, because what Jason does next will show that sometimes the smallest gesture can change an entire life. The storm had rolled in early that evening. Snow fell in thick, slow flakes that blurred the world into white and silence. Streetlights hummed faintly through the curtain of frost, each halo of light shrinking with the cold. Inside his small cottage at the edge of town, Jasonstatham sat alone. The fire had burned low. He hadn't added a log in an hour, not because he was short on wood, but because he didn't see the point. Warmth didn't fix the kind of quiet he lived with. It had been 3 years since he'd retired. 3 years since the missions, the noise, the purpose. People said time healed, but Jason had learned that time only muffled, it didn't mend. He'd buried friends, walked away from the battlefield, and tried to build a life that didn't depend on danger. But peace, it turned out, could be just as heavy as war. The kettle whistled softly, snapping him out of the drift. He poured himself a cup of tea, sat near the window, and watched the snow swallow the road. It was empty, like always. He liked it that way, or told himself he did. Then came the sound. A knock. Faint, hesitant, barely there. He frowned. Nobody visited this late, not out here, not in that kind of cold. He waited, listening. The wind hissed against the eaves, but the knock came again, softer this time, like the hand behind it wasn't sure it should keep trying. Jason set his cup down. His instincts, the same ones that once saved him, stirred again. He moved to the door, unlatched it, and pulled it open. Cold air rushed in, biting at his face. And there, barely visible under the porch light, stood a little boy. He couldn't have been more than 8, thin, pale, with hair plastered wet against his forehead. His shoes were torn, his fingers red from the cold. Around his shoulders, wrapped tight like armor, was Jason's old doormat, frayed, stiff, filthy from years of being stepped on. The boy's lips trembled, and when he spoke, his voice cracked. "Sir, may I keep this blanket?" Jason blinked. The words didn't make sense at first. Then he looked down again and saw the mat, the trembling, the snow melting in streaks across the boy's arms. He crouched. "Where'd you get that?" "Outside," the boy said softly. "Near your gate, it was by the bin." Jason felt a knot tighten in his chest. "It's not a blanket," he said gently. "I know," the boy's breath fogged between them, "but it's warm." For a moment neither spoke. Snow gathered quietly on the boy's hair. Jason glanced out toward the empty street, half expecting someone, a parent, a car, a reason, but there was nothing. Only the long white road stretching into the dark. "You live nearby?" Jason asked. The boy shook his head. "I was just walking." "Walking where?" He shrugged, eyes down. "Nowhere, just walking." Jason studied him, the thin frame, the way his hands clutched the mat like it was something sacred. It wasn't just cold that had brought him here. It was hunger, fear, loneliness. He sighed quietly and stepped aside. "Come in." The boy hesitated. "I don't want to bother you, sir." "You already have," Jason said with a faint smile, "so you might as well get warm." Inside, the boy stood near the doorway, dripping melted snow onto the floorboards. Jason closed the door behind him and nodded toward the fire. "Sit." The boy moved cautiously, as if afraid the warmth wasn't meant for him. When he finally sat down, he kept the mat wrapped around his shoulders. Jason tossed a few logs into the hearth. Flames crackled back to life, painting the room in gold and orange. "What's your name?" Jason asked. "Eli." "Eli," Jason repeated. "You out here alone?" The boy nodded. "My mum's working. She said she'd come back before dark," but his voice trailed off. Jason's jaw tightened. "You been waiting for her?" "Since yesterday." The fire popped. Jason leaned back against the table, arms crossed. "You eaten?" Eli shook his head. "Didn't have money." Jason moved to the kitchen without a word, returned with a bowl of soup and a slice of bread. He placed them on the coffee table. "Eat slow," he said. "You'll make yourself sick if you don't." Eli stared at the food for a moment before digging in, the kind of hunger that doesn't come from one missed meal but from too many. Jason watched silently, not pitying him, just thinking. After a while, Eli looked up. "Is this your house?" Jason nodded. "It's quiet." "Yeah," Jason said softly. "Too quiet sometimes." The boy smiled faintly. "You live alone?" "Yeah." Eli hesitated. "I used to too." Jason's eyes lifted. "Used to." The boy swallowed, the warmth slowly bringing color back to his cheeks. "We had a flat before, me and Mum, but they took it away. Said she owed money." Jason frowned. "Who's they?" Eli shrugged. "Men in suits. She cried a lot after that, said we'd find something better. We didn't." Jason said nothing. He just listened. The boy's words were too matter-of-fact, too grown for his age, the kind that come from a child who's learned life doesn't wait for fairness. After a few minutes, Eli's eyelids began to droop. Jason took the empty bowl, set it aside, and pulled a blanket from the couch. "Here," he said, handing it over. The boy shook his head. "It's yours." Jason sighed. "So was that doormat." That got a small laugh, the first sound of lightness all night. Eli took the blanket, wrapped it tight, and lay back against the couch. Within minutes, he was asleep. Jason stood there staring at him. The firelight danced across the boy's face, peaceful, fragile, too still. Something twisted inside Jason, a memory maybe. His brother when they were kids, sneaking into Jason's room after a nightmare, whispering, "Don't tell Mum." Jason rubbed his hands over his face and exhaled slowly. He hadn't thought of that in years. He hadn't thought of family at all. He sat in the armchair and watched the snow thicken outside. The world felt suspended, just the fire, the storm, and the sound of a child breathing softly in his home. Hours passed. At some point, Jason dozed off. When he woke, dawn was barely breaking, pale light spilling through the curtains. The storm had calmed, leaving the world covered in still, untouched snow. He looked to the couch, empty. The blanket was folded neatly, the spot cold. The door slightly ajar. Jason's heart kicked once, then twice. He got up fast, grabbed his coat, and stepped outside. Footprints, small ones, led down the path, fading into the road. The doormat was gone. He followed the prints through the quiet street, breath misting in the morning air. They curved past a row of shuttered shops, across the bridge, and stopped near the old bus station. There, on a bench under the shelter, sat Eli. The mat was wrapped around him again. His head rested against the armrest, eyes closed. Jason walked over, kneeling beside him. "Eli." The boy stirred. "Sorry," he murmured. "Didn't want to wake you." "Why'd you leave?" Eli rubbed his eyes. "Didn't want to make trouble. You helped me enough." Jason sat down beside him. "Trouble's letting a kid freeze outside, not offering him breakfast." Eli smiled sleepily. "You talk funny." Jason chuckled softly. "Been told worse." He looked around, buses idling, people passing, no one paying attention. The city was waking up again, all hurry and noise, but right there on that bench, time still felt slow. "Your mum," Jason said finally. "Do you know where she works?" Eli hesitated. "A diner maybe. She cleans tables." Jason thought. There was only one diner open late enough for someone to lose track of a night shift. "Let's go find her." The boy's eyes widened. "You'll help me?" Jason nodded once. "I don't walk away from people who knock on my door." They started down the street together, a strange pair. A retired man with lines carved deep in his face, and a boy carrying a doormat like a cloak. By the time they reached the diner, sunlight had burned through the fog. The smell of coffee and eggs drifted out the door. Jason held it open. Eli stepped inside, blinking against the brightness. Behind the counter, a woman in a faded apron turned, eyes tired, face pale from worry. When she saw Eli, her hands flew to her mouth. Eli. The boy ran to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She dropped to her knees, hugging him tight. "Where were you? I thought," her voice cracked. Jason looked away, giving them space. Moments like that didn't need witnesses, they needed silence. When the woman finally looked up, tears streaking her cheeks, Jason nodded politely. "He found my house last night," he said quietly. "You've got a brave kid." She exhaled, shaking her head. "I told him to stay at the shelter if I didn't come home. I didn't think." Jason raised a hand. "He's safe, that's what matters." She looked at him, really looked, and something softened in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Jason gave a faint smile, just answered the door. They talked for a few minutes, nothing deep, just names and gratitude. Then Jason excused himself, but as he stepped outside, Eli ran after him. "You forgot something," the boy said, holding out the folded doormat. Jason stared at it, then shook his head. "Keep it." Eli frowned. "But it's yours." Jason crouched down. "Not anymore, looks like it fits you better." The boy grinned wide, bright, unguarded. "Thank you, sir." Jason stood, adjusting his coat. "Stay warm, Eli." He walked off down the street, the sound of the diner fading behind him. For a moment, he felt lighter, like the cold hadn't won after all. But as he turned the corner, something nagged at him, a thought he couldn't shake. The way the boy had said his mum used to live somewhere. The way her hands trembled when she spoke. The kind of fear that doesn't end with one warm night. He stopped, looking back at the diner window. Inside, Eli and his mother sat together, laughing softly over breakfast. It should have been enough. But Jason knew better. Sometimes, when the world gives you a second chance to open your door, it's because the story isn't finished yet. He didn't know it then, but the choice he'd made that night, to answer one quiet knock, was about to pull him into something far deeper than an act of kindness. Jason didn't go home right away. He walked instead, slow, steady steps through the thawing streets, the crunch of snow under his boots echoing in the quiet. The sun had risen, but it was a pale light, thin, cold, more shadow than warmth. He told himself it was over. The boy was safe, the mother found. But something inside him kept replaying that knock, that small voice asking for a blanket that wasn't one. He stopped at a corner shop, bought 2 coffees, and stood by the window. He could see the diner across the street through the glass. Eli sat by the counter, his mother pouring tea beside him. For a moment, everything looked right, normal. Then a man entered. Dark coat, rushed energy, the kind of presence that fills space with trouble. He walked straight to the woman, slammed something on the counter, and leaned in close. Jason couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. The body language told him everything. The woman's shoulders shrank. Eli gripped his mother's sleeve. Jason put down his cup, eyes narrowing. He crossed the street before he'd even realized he'd moved. When he stepped inside, the bell above the door jingled softly. The man turned, sharp eyes, rough face, the type who'd seen more debts collected than days worked. "Something you need, mate?" he asked. Jason's voice was calm. "Depends, you here for breakfast or business?" The man smirked. "What's it to you?" Jason's gaze flicked toward Eli and his mother. The boy's small hands clung to the table, knuckles white. The woman looked at Jason, not pleading, just tired. The kind of tired that said, "Please don't make this worse." Jason took a breath, stepped closer. "You're upsetting the kid." The man laughed, mean and short. "You one of those heroes, huh? This ain't your concern." Jason tilted his head, his tone quiet. "It is now." Something shifted in the man's eyes, confusion maybe at the calmness. He looked Jason up and down. "You don't want to get involved, old man." Jason didn't flinch. "You're right," he said softly. "I don't, but he deserves to eat in peace." The man's jaw twitched. For a second it looked like he might push it. Then he saw something in Jason's eyes that made him think twice. That calm, unblinking stillness that only certain men carry, men who have seen worse and survived it. He grunted, grabbed the papers he'd thrown on the counter, and stormed out. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the glasses on the shelves. Silence followed. Eli looked from Jason to his mother. The woman exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. "You didn't have to do that," she said, voice trembling. Maybe not, Jason replied, but someone did. She swallowed, nodding faintly. He's from the company that loaned me money. After my husband passed, things got hard. I fell behind. They said if I don't pay by next week, they'll take everything left. Jason sat down across from her. You have family. She shook her head. No one left. Eli spoke up softly. We had a house once. Dad built my room himself. Jason looked at him, something stirring behind his calm. What happened to him? The woman's voice faltered. He worked construction, good man, but after the layoffs he started drinking. He was proud, wouldn't ask for help. When the debt came, he couldn't handle it. I tried, but... She stopped there, her hands trembling on the counter. Jason's jaw tightened. He'd seen that story before, not on screens or in stories, but in real life, in faces that haunted memory. Good men undone by bad luck. Families broken not by weakness but by the world's indifference. Where is he buried? Jason asked quietly. She looked up confused. Why? Because some debts aren't meant to be repaid in money. That afternoon Jason went home, but he didn't sit by the fire. He pulled out an old wooden box from under the bed, dust-covered, heavy, marked with age. Inside were fragments of another life, service tags, faded photos, medals he'd never cared to display. He stared at one picture, him and his brother, both in uniform, smiling in front of a transport truck. His brother's hand was on his shoulder. That had been the last photo before his brother left the service, before the letters stopped coming. Jason traced a finger over the image. He hadn't realized until now how much Eli's eyes resembled his brother's, that same steady, unspoken kindness. The next morning Jason returned to the diner. The woman, Amelia, he'd learned was wiping tables. Eli ran up the moment he saw Jason. "Sir, I helped wash dishes," he said proudly. Jason grinned faintly. "Good man." Amelia looked up surprised. "You came back." "Didn't have anywhere else to be," Jason said with a shrug. They talked a while, simple things like weather, school, work. Jason found himself listening more than speaking. Every detail painted a clearer picture. A mother trying to stay strong, a child trying not to notice her breaking. After a few minutes, Amelia brought over a small envelope. "For yesterday," she said, sliding it toward him. "You paid for our breakfast. I can't accept charity." Jason looked at it, then at her. "That's not charity, that's a favor. You can pay me back by staying warm this winter." She tried to argue, but his tone ended the discussion. He left soon after, but not before telling Eli to visit sometime. The boy nodded eagerly. "Can I bring the blanket?" he asked, holding up the doormat. Jason smiled. "Wouldn't be yours without it." Days passed. Jason spent his mornings clearing the path outside his gate. Every now and then he'd hear small footsteps and turn to find Eli standing there, waving shyly. They'd share cocoa, talk about dogs, snow, life, the kind of quiet friendship that didn't need words. But one evening Eli came running, not smiling this time. His face was pale, his breath sharp from running. "Sir," he gasped, "Mum's in trouble." Jason dropped the cup in his hand. "Where?" "At the diner. The men, the ones who came before, they're back." Jason grabbed his coat. The cold outside hit like a wall, but he didn't feel it. His body moved on instinct, fast, deliberate, controlled. When he reached the diner, the front door was open, the lights flickering. Inside, two men stood by the counter, shouting. Amelia was backed against the wall, arms raised. Jason walked in quietly. No sound, just the slow click of the door closing behind him. The taller man turned, irritated. "We said we'd be back." He stopped when he saw Jason. Jason's voice was calm, level, terrifyingly steady. "She told you she needed time." The man scoffed. "This your business?" Jason stepped closer. "You made it mine." The other man moved forward, hand reaching into his coat, but Jason was faster. His hand caught the man's wrist mid-motion, twisting it just enough to make him drop what he was holding. The sound of metal hitting the floor broke the silence. "Pick that up," Jason said softly, "and you'll lose more than money tonight." Neither man spoke. The fire in Jason's eyes said everything. After a moment they backed off, muttering threats they didn't mean. The door shut behind them. Silence returned, heavy, trembling. Amelia stood frozen. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. Jason looked at her, then at Eli, who had crept in behind him. "No one hurts family," he said simply. Amelia's lips parted. "Family." Jason hesitated, his throat tightened. "My brother, he had a son once. I never got to meet him." Eli tilted his head. "What was his name?" Jason looked at the boy, something flickering behind his eyes. "Daniel." Amelia froze. Her hands covered her mouth as her knees nearly gave out. Daniel Statham." Jason's world stopped. He stared at her. "You knew him." Her voice broke. "He was my husband." Eli turned sharply, eyes wide. "You mean?" Jason knelt down, staring at the boy, seeing it now, the eyes, the smile, the quiet strength. His brother's son. The boy whispered, "You're my uncle." Jason couldn't speak. He just pulled the boy into his arms, holding him like the world might disappear again if he let go. For the first time in years, something inside him eased. The weight he'd carried, all the years of silence, of not knowing, lifted. In the weeks that followed, things changed. Jason helped Amelia settle her debts, not through force but through quiet resolve. He fixed the leaks in their small apartment, bought Eli a proper coat, and started spending his mornings at the diner. Word spread about what happened that night, not the fight, not the threats, but the way Jason carried himself afterward. Calm, kind, grateful. People began stopping by the diner, offering small helps, meals, hours of work. It wasn't charity, it was community. One evening, Eli came running into the diner again, but this time smiling, waving something above his head. "Mum, Uncle Jason," he shouted, "look what I made." It was a small sign, hand-painted, uneven letters spelling, "Home is where someone answers the door." Jason looked at it for a long time, then at the boy. He smiled, that quiet, knowing smile of a man who's seen too much and finally found something worth keeping. Later that night, as snow began to fall again, Jason stood by the door of the diner, coat collar turned up, watching the street. Across the way, a man passed by, cold, alone, shoulders hunched against the wind. Jason almost called out. Almost. Then he glanced at the glowing sign in the window, "Open." He didn't need to. Someone else would answer this time. And for the first time in years, Jason felt warm.